Hello, everyone. I don't know who's joined in, but I think we will get started in a few minutes. You can always use the chat box, I think, to talk to me since I can't hear you guys. If you want to just let me know if you're kind of good to go or if you've joined in. There's me now. Okay, looks like we have 2 people, possibly. Okay. Well, Chris is in, so that's great. And Andrew, of the same last name. Hi. Oh, there's some noises happening. Okay, if you guys don't mind waiting just a few minutes, I guess, until we get a few more people, and then we'll start. Hi, Diana. Nice to kind of meet you. Okay. Okay, since we do have at least 3 people here, how is sound? Video doesn't matter as much because I'll be playing a PowerPoint slide in a second, but can you hear me okay? Is it clear? Okay, awesome. Well, I think we will get started. Whoever joins in when they join in is fine, and they can catch up. They can always ask questions afterwards. Okay, so official introduction. My name is Karina Moldovan. I'm the Communications Officer at FACTOR. So my background is generally in administration and music. I don't have any talent. I don't play anything. I'm not in a band. I'm terrible at all that. So I've stuck to the office life, and I do my best to help other people access funding so that they can make all of their wonderful, talented music. So I'll be going over what FACTOR is, how it works, and then covering some of the main programs that would be accessible to anybody starting out in our system, whether you've applied before or whether this is your first time ever doing that. So I'll play a PowerPoint deck and I'll go through it. Feel free to just type in questions if they come up. I think it's nicer to just sort of keep it going through the whole time, and then I can answer that. Adam asks if there's audio. There's definitely audio. It's me talking. Make sure your thing isn't on mute, possibly. It seems other people can hear me. If not, you'll be able to follow along the PowerPoint, I guess. Okay, so we'll get started. Hopefully he makes it work. Great, so you can hear me? Adam, everything's good? Fantastic. Okay, so we have some people, wonderful. So hold on, I'll share my screen in a second. Can everyone see this PowerPoint? Can you also see my chat box though? Is that going to be an issue? I don't know. Put it in the corner somewhere. Or not at all. Okay, we'll see how that works out. Okay, so FACTOR, about FACTOR, for those who maybe don't know, stands for the Foundation Assisting Canadian Talent on Recordings. It's kind of a long name. FACTOR has been around since the early 80s, so it was put together by a bunch of radio broadcasters when CanCon came around, Canadian Content Regulation. So of course, if we want Canadian music on radio, we have to also put money and invest in Canadian musicians to make that music. So that's sort of how FACTOR got started, to fund sound recordings specifically. It's a partnership between public and private funding. So we get about half of our budget comes from the Canadian government, federal government, through the Department of Canadian Heritage, and then the other half comes from private radio broadcasters still. So we have some programs that are funded only by the government and some that are funded only by radio. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's all one big pool of money that we administer. To give you some context as to how much money that is, it was about just over $19.5 million last year. That number has been consistently going up. So our annual operating budget is usually around the 20 million mark, and obviously a large majority of that goes into grants to artists, music companies, and different kinds of collectives and sponsorship events. I did look up the numbers for Alberta specifically, which is last year was 960,000. It does include events, so if there's festivals or things like that going on, that number is in there. That went to artists and companies and events in Alberta for last year. So hopefully you were part of that or are going to be part of that. Oh yeah, I guess I can read our mandate there. So our mandate does focus around making sound recordings and supporting the industry at large, which includes music companies. I think it's important to understand, I'll talk about it later as well, but FACTOR was created for the purpose of sound recordings, and so we do have a bit of a different view than arts councils might, where we look at the commercial potential of a project as well as the art and the music itself. Okay, so I talked about the budget a little bit. We support all artists and music companies in any language other than French. So in Quebec, there is a FACTOR kind of sister organization called Musique Action, and they fund French language music. If you do speak both English and French, and say you're making an album and it's kind of a combination, as long as over 50% of the lyrics are in English, then you would come to us and we would fund that. So our funding is project-based, meaning it's not just kind of an envelope funding that you apply for at the beginning of the year. You would have a project in mind, whether it's going on tour or creating a demo or an album or whatever it may be, and you check out our programs and see which one fits what you need the most in that moment in time, kind of thinking ahead 1 or 2 years at most. So you would be applying for that project in particular. Anybody have any questions at this point? Okay. If they pop up, I'll catch them. So how you get started. As long as you are Canadian, or at least half of your band is Canadian, you are eligible, and that's pretty much all it takes. You don't need to have any prior experience. You don't need to have released music in the past. You could be literally applying for funding for your very, very first project, and that's totally fine. It does not put you at any kind of disadvantage. And on the other side of things, if you're really experienced and have been doing this for many years, same thing, doesn't matter to us. You're just applying for a specific project, and we're not too concerned about your past, whether it's full or empty. You do have to provide proof of Canadian citizenship. So when you sign up to our system, every person in the band, and if you're a solo artist, obviously it's just you, you would have to show some proof of Canadian citizenship, which is in the list in there. So a scan of your passport, birth certificate, citizenship card, permanent resident card, or your secure certificate of Indian status card. So either of those are valid. As long as your name and info is there, then you're all good to go. Okay, so next step is in the profile section. So in order to sort of get started with the application process, you need to create 3 profiles in our system. Yes, Diana, let's ask the question. Sound would be really good in this. Yeah, that's fine. So, no. That's a good question. I'm pretty sure 2 of the 5 should be okay. I would double check that. Maybe I'll write that down and check, because obviously uneven numbers happen all the time. I think there's some leniency there, of course. It depends on the project coordinator might be fine with that. So let me get back to you, and I can email you about that. Okay. Sorry that I couldn't answer the first one. Okay. No, there's definitely no, it doesn't really matter whether they're the lead singer or the drummer or whatever it might be. It's usually just the number of people. All right, so in your user profile is the first thing you're going to do. It's got a fancy name like user profile, but it really, it's just a login. So it's going to be your email address. This is where it's going to ask you some demographic questions that are optional to answer. You upload the proof of Canadian citizenship, and it is important to note that in a band situation, every single member does have to have their own login. So this is the only scenario where everyone needs to have separate passwords, separate email, separate account with Factor. Even if you don't plan on being in charge of the rest of the accounts or handling the money or anything like that, your information does need to be in there. So that's a really easy 20-second process that you can get done. Once you're in there, you have to create 2 profiles. One is your applicant profile. So in this case, unless you are a corporation or an organization, you're applying for event funding, your business activity will be artist. So that's what 99% of you will be choosing. And this is the account that is used to, or the profile that is used to accept funding. Say you're offered funding. Oops, I don't know what I just did there. No. So one applicant profile, Adam, everyone can see this, I assume. It says if you have multiple projects, do you need multiple profiles? Just one. So once you make it the first time, that's the one you use going forward, and you don't have to keep going back in and doing this all over again. You can apply to multiple projects with the same profile every single time. So that one should last you literally your whole Factor career, I guess. So what companies are eligible? Yeah, so you can pick primary business activity would be artist, because say primarily you are applying for funding as an artist. If you do also do something else on the side, which many people obviously in this industry do, there are options where you can pick other activities that you're involved in. In this example that you have written about running an audio production company that does studio things, that's a type of company that Factor does not fund, so you are free to put it in your profile, but it won't affect that profile in any way, because there's nothing for you to apply to as that. Say you ran your own record label, for example, you would put both artist and record label in there, and then you could work towards getting a record label rating. So still one profile, and you can fill all the information that you need to just in that one. Hope that clears that up. Yeah, so this is pretty much you as a business. So if you're, I'll answer that in 1 second. If you're, I think I lost it. So I'll answer the question. What are examples? So the companies that we do fund are music publishers, music distributors, record labels, and managers. So all 4 of those have different requirements to achieve the ratings needed to apply to certain programs. And those programs generally are industry support. So business travel and business development that are directly related to the company and that benefit more than just one artist. So if you are you released your own music, but you're the only person on your roster, for example, that wouldn't be eligible because any business funding going to you is only benefiting you. So it would be a record label with a certain number of qualifying releases and a certain number of Canadian artists that are signed to them. Yeah, so those are the 4 different companies that we do fund. And there are ways that you can kind of access that even at a lower level. And we do have a section on our website that outlines all of the requirements for each of those different companies. Okay, so say you're in a band and everybody has their user profile. Just one of you needs to create the applicant profile, and that's the person who will then be responsible for all of the funding and all of the financial stuff that goes along with the project. So Diana would put Diana's name, and then all of the rest of her band members trust her to handle it, and she's the one who's in charge and in contact with Factor and dealing with the rest of it. So again, that profile is pretty easy to fill out. It's just some basic information. It doesn't ask you for very much. And then the last one, which is one of the most important ones, is the artist profile. So this is you as an artist. Solo artist, that means it's just your name or your stage name, whatever it might be. If you're in a band, it would be your band name. This is where we ask you what genre of music you play. We ask you to upload an artist biography to let us know a little bit about you. We don't analyze that deeply or anything. It's just to give us an idea of who you are and the fact that you are an active band or an active musician. And choosing the genre, I will emphasize here, is pretty important because it does affect later on when you're applying for juried programs. The genre of your project and of your band is the genre that we're going to look at the jurors for. So our juror pool, for example, has 1,800 people in it. There are certain people who say, okay, my expertise is in folk music, for example, so if you submit for a folk project, we're going to make sure that your project only makes it to folk jurors, because having somebody who's an expert in rap isn't going to really help you out too much. So that is an important part of filling out your artist profile. And another important part is making sure that you have added all of the artist members that are in your band. So this is where the user profile comes back into play, and everybody needs their own login. Whoever is handling the artist profile, which is generally the same person handling the applicant profile, would just fill in the name and role and citizenship of every person that's in that band. And again, once you've done this once, it just stays as is unless anything changes and you need to update it. Equally dispersed right now, so there are no envelopes set aside for different genres, but we do try to keep an eye on if, you know, there's obviously some underserved genres out there. We do increase we have an outreach department. We try to increase our outreach to those communities and to those genres to try to obviously up those numbers. But as of right now, everybody goes into the same pool. So it could be kind of anyone. Any profile questions? Does that all make sense? Okay. So I will start talking about the programs. I will start with Showcase. That one's kind of an easy one to get through. And then we'll talk about artist development and juried sound recording, which are 2 juried programs. Okay. Gotta keep moving this around. So the Showcase program is actually a component of our larger live performance program. This is available and accessible by anybody, and it supports your travel costs if you are invited to play a showcase. A showcase, the definition that we have of that is not just any live public show. It needs to be invite only, as in you were invited specifically to play. Generally, these happen at conferences, and the audience are industry people, so booking agents and managers and labels. So if you get invited to play Canadian Music Week in Toronto, for example, that would be a showcase. Going to Breakout West in the Yukon soon, that would be a showcase. So official industry showcases is what this applies to. They can also be international, so it does not have to be in Canada, anything in the States or anything in Europe, across the world really, as long as you have an invite and it meets the definition of what a showcase is, it's eligible. So it is a subsidy. We provide 75% of the funding up to a maximum of $7,500 per year. So you can do multiple per year up to that maximum, however many you end up having. Outside of Canada, it's totally fine. Yes. Okay, so whoa, I didn't mean to do that. What we ask of you when you're applying for showcase funding is simply to show us the invitation that you have received to play the showcase. You do need to have a current release that, like an album that has been released, no more than 24 months before you submit your application, or an upcoming one that has to be released within 6 months. So it's a pretty wide range. It really just means, have you released anything the past 2 years, then you're good to go. Or if you have something coming up, for it to make sense and warrant the fact that you're going to play this showcase and there is a career move in there. And we do ask you for a list of industry people that you have invited to your showcase, which could mean either through, usually conferences have their little portal online where the delegates are listed and you can invite them through that, or however you decide to promote that showcase. We do want to see that you have looked into who is attending and who would be best for you to meet or to talk to, or that you are interested in creating a business networking relationship with. So those are the 3 main things. You would submit that at least 1 day before you leave, so you won't necessarily know right away if you got the funding, but assuming everything is eligible, this isn't something that goes to a jury and they have to decide if it's worth it or not for you. As long as you meet these requirements, you're pretty much a shoo-in, and it's not too difficult to get if you do meet all of these things. So 1 day before you leave, don't do it afterwards, because then it won't be eligible and nothing will count, and you want that stuff to count. Any showcase questions? Maybe not. I did have one other thing I was going to say about this one. Oh, if you're interested in, I didn't talk about the type of costs that are covered here. So travel costs, airfare, fees, things like that, hired musicians, hotel, meals, things like that, pretty much anything associated with traveling from where you live to where you have to go. And there is a rule, though, that you cannot play between or within a 300, I believe, kilometer radius of your hometown. So if you're in Alberta and you're in northern Alberta and there's I don't really know the distances there, but if you have something kind of nearby that's a conference, unfortunately it won't count because you're really not traveling very far for it. So it does have to be outside of your radius, and all these details are in the program guidelines. A festival can count. It depends if it meets the definition of our showcase, which is that there are industry partners. So there's a lot of, for example, Rifflandia. I don't know if you guys know that. It's in BC, Victoria, BC. Last year was an eligible showcase for us because they had a conference and an industry component. So there were official showcases that were scheduled within the conference portion of Rifflandia that were not the main stage of the festival where the general public watched shows. So that counts. If you're talking about just a festival, there's literally nothing else except, you know, your stages and your field and people buy tickets and go. Unfortunately, that does not count. So it does have to have that industry component to it. But it's always worth looking into what shows and festivals add them sometimes. They expand and they get bigger and they do add a conference portion or an industry portion, and that would make it eligible. Okay, are we okay to move on? How are people feeling about showcase? Okay. So now into the big stuff. So Factor has 2 juried programs. I mentioned the jury a little bit. I'll talk about them more after I go through these programs. But this means that applying to the 2 programs I'm about to talk about, go to a juror pool of industry peers, so other artists, people who run labels, things like that, and they assess your application. So it's not me looking at your application. It's not our project coordinators here that are listening to your music and reading your plan. It's all of your peers out across the country. So the first one of these is called Artist Development. This formerly was known as the Demo Grant a few years ago at Factor, and it's a $2,000 grant, so it's kind of a mini intro one. And the rules around it are very flexible. You can do kind of whatever you want with it. We do have a list of ineligible costs, so things that you are not allowed to do with it, like buy alcohol and buy gear and equipment. That's a big question that we get a lot. Can I buy a guitar or something? You definitely cannot do that. So there's a list of things you can't do. It's very, very small, and it applies just across Factor in general. Other than that, if you want to put it all into making a video, go ahead. If you want to put it all into marketing something that you've already made, that's fine too. The only thing around this is that we want you to tell us your plan. What are you doing in your artist development year? So say you get the grant January 1st, conveniently. It's a year-long kind of window for you to use that money and to report back to us how you use that money. When you're applying, we want to know what your plan is for the year, how you're going to achieve it, why is this your plan for the year, how is this going to help your career, what's the purpose, how much does it cost, of course. So it doesn't have to be, you're not going to be able to know exactly how much everything costs, but you kind of have a rough idea as to what you want to do and what are you going to put that $2,000 towards. And of course, it's not a giant amount of money, so chances are whatever project you have in mind might require more. We still want to know about it, even if it's not going to be funded directly through our grant. So I think it's really important to think of the juror reading your application. They need a full picture and full context as to what you're going to do. You know what you're going to do, so you can apply to Factor and say, I just need this one little video funding, but the juror doesn't know that, and they need to know kind of your whole plan for your career, at least for the short-term 1-year future. As all Factor funding, nothing is 100% funded, so it's 75% to a maximum of $2,000. So this is important to keep in mind because that means that you need to spend a full, or show us that you have spent a full $2,667 for us to give you the full $2,000. So that means $667 does have to come out of your pocket, and then you'll get the full $2K. What we ask in this application is an artist bio. We've already uploaded one to your artist profile, but we ask for a separate one so that the jurors get it, make sure it's updated, and this is something that they do look at pretty closely. An artist development plan, which is sort of our form online. It's 3 questions, and that's it. It used to be a 3-page document that we asked for, and we've cut it down to 3 questions. And it's just, what are you doing? How are you doing it? Why are you doing it? And then 1 assessment track. So you have only 1 song to give us, to give the jurors, that they're going to listen to assess if you get the funding or not. So there is a breakdown online and in the guidelines where it goes through what sort of what the weight is of each of these things. Your artist development plan is pretty high, but you'll see also in juried sound recording the music does count for most of this, and it is the most important part. So of course we do still look at the art and the actual music of it, but you do have to have a good plan surrounding that music, because if you have a great song and everything sounds wonderful, but you have no cohesive plan as to how you're going to market that song or what you're going to do with it, $2,000 isn't really going to get you anywhere. So make sure that you have a balanced idea of having good music and having a good plan around it to achieve whatever goal you have for that year. Does anybody have questions about artist development? Oh, I should also mention the deadlines. So 2 deadlines a year. The one that passed was in May. The upcoming one very soon is October 17th. That means you have some time to put an application together. If this is a program that you were interested in, you have time to get your profile set up, even if you don't already have that, and take a look at the application and see what you might need and if it fits for you. Okay, so no AD questions. If they come up later, you can throw them in. Okay, so the next one is juried sound recording. This is same deadlines, by the way, and it's much, much larger. Oh, so I haven't updated this yet. The slide says a maximum of 47,000 500. That's currently up to 57,500, an extra 10,000 there. So it's quite a bit of money that you have access to, and this covers a full album cycle, as it were. So this is what you would apply to if you have plans to record a full-length sound recording, and then you can access funding to support the entire cycle of that sound recording release. So there's marketing, tour support, showcase, video, and radio marketing. Again, it's 75% up to that maximum of $57,500. There is a breakdown per component as to how much money you can use for each of those activities. For sound recording, it's a maximum of $10,000. So out of that 57, 10,000 max can go to sound recording, and the rest of it you can sort of split up as you wish amongst those other activities. So you can do every single one: marketing, tour, showcase, video, radio marketing. You could just do one if you wanted to. So there's no, it's not mandatory to access all of the components. Once you've been accepted for this program, that full set of money is sort of set aside and earmarked for you. So you're not reapplying to get accepted again, but you would be applying for your video component, for example. Okay, now you want to make a video, this is your video plan, etc. So it still has to meet the requirements, but the money is kind of already there, set aside for you to access. It's not going to a jury again to look at the merit of the project. That's only going to be the first time you apply. And once it's accepted, then yeah, everything's kind of there for you to use as you'd like. Yes, definitely. So for the question is, can funding be used to hire a producer? Yeah, that's obvious. That's a really big one. So in sound recording, anything to do with recording the actual album, the producer, the audio engineers, studio costs, anything that goes along with recording that whole album is eligible. And something I didn't mention for artist development, but applies to both of these programs, is that we do have something called the self-production allowance. So a lot of people produce their own albums, and that's become pretty common, of course. And there is up to $500 that you can pretty much pay yourself to record. Say you're going to do your own mastering, or you're doing whatever goes into that. That's something that you can claim. So that helps. If you remember back in artist development, I said you have to spend $2,667. If you're going to produce your own album or your own song, whatever it might be, and you claim that $500, that goes towards that total. So really you could end up just spending $167 out of your own pocket to get a full $2,500 when it comes down to it. So pay yourself, and there are some rules around how that works, but you can look at the guidelines for that and know that it's an option. Sure. Okay. So I'll elaborate on. I'll start on this part. So what the jurors look at. So you give us a, oh my lord, description of goals and results. So again, this is like a amped up artist development plan. What do you want to do in the sound recording and releasing this album, and that whole next 2 years you have of doing this, and what do you hope to achieve from it? We ask you for 2 assessment tracks instead of just 1. And the thing that says description of changes you wish to make to the assessment tracks. So when you're giving us assessment tracks, they have to be original, so no covers, and they can't be previously released. So they have to be new songs, or new to us anyways. Maybe you made them 5 years ago, but you've never released them, and this is now what you want to use. So you're going to describe the changes you want to make to the tracks using the grant money that you're about to get, or that you're hoping to get, because we're assuming that what you're showing us, one of those tracks is a track that's going to be on the final album, but it's obviously not in its final state when you're submitting it to us. Otherwise, why would you need our money, right? So you're giving us kind of rough cuts, or like a demo, ultimately, of the songs that you wish to put on your final album. And there is a small section where you're going to say, okay, I'd like to add drums to this, or I want to bring this producer on, or I want to master it in this way. So you're just going to sort of describe, it doesn't have to be really long either, a small paragraph about what changes you're going to make to those 2 tracks to improve them, to make them worthy of being on your album, or whatever you want to do to them. For some people, it's just one little thing. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but we do want to see that the song you just gave us is not totally, completely, finally done. It needs to be in a sort of state of flux. Does that make sense? No, so definitely not reimbursing. It is important to note that all of the funding and costs that you're going to claim to us have to have happened after you applied. So if you've already done all this and you've already paid for it, it's done. So there's nothing you can really come to for us. Say you've done the recording part, but now you still have mixing and mastering, you can come in and apply, even if you're sort of halfway through the process, because you still have costs that are coming up in the future that you can claim to factor. So if you have literally done everything in the recording process and you have no costs left, then it's probably not the program for you. Okay, right, so those are the things. Yeah, go ahead with the producer question. Yeah, so it would be within that $10,000 because it's a sound recording cost only. So it has to fit sort of the eligibility of the component that it's in, yes. Okay, so the last things we ask you, actually the biggest thing we ask of you, is a detailed marketing plan. This does need to be a fairly professional / thought out marketing plan. We do have a guide or sort of a template on our website to guide people through what we expect to see in that marketing plan. It doesn't have to be super long. It's important to note that the jurors only have so much time when they're assessing each application, so definitely quality over quantity. So even if it's 2 pages, but like super well thought out, you have all of your plans in there, then that's great. So that and the 2 songs are the most important part of this entire application. That's where most of the weighted scores are, and it's important to get that right. So things you'll see in the guide, I suggest you look it up, that have to be in that plan is, you know, what territory are you releasing in? What producer are you using? Do you have any letters of support? What's your timeline? So it's a lot of kind of basic stuff, but you do have to have a strategy, a promotion strategy, a release strategy that shows that you're not just making an album for the hell of it because you want to and it's your hobby. I mean, it's fine that it's your hobby, but you have to have a plan for it. So this comes from, in case you're like, well, that sucks, what if it's just my hobby and I want to make an album? This is why Factor is quite a bit different from arts councils, is that we do care what you do with it after the fact. We're not going to go track you down and, you know, see how it does necessarily, but we are interested in, is this radio friendly? Even if it's not, I mean, we fund a lot of genres, but we do want to see that there is a quote unquote commercial, not a great word, it's not a fun one, viability to this project. Even if it's niche, even if it's, you know, it's only going to be in your region, but it's going to be a big hit in that region, that's really great, right? So we do want to know that there is a plan for that whole album release. And then what else is it? Recording start date, when are you going to start? Ideally after you've applied, but again, if it already happened and you still have costs, that's okay. And current artist biography, just like in everything else. So there's definitely a lot to unpack in this program. It's hard to kind of go over it. You know, these are the basics. We do have full guidelines on our site that go through all of the details and what all these things mean and how it works. So definitely take a look at that. But if anyone has any immediate questions about this program now, I could definitely address that. Okay, so we will move on. Yes, I like questions. Good, good. This is not a question I get often. There's a level of success that makes you ineligible for factor funding, but yes. So there are certain, I think for juried sound recording, pretty much anybody can apply. But if you've had like a platinum album or something like that, there's like a few small points at which you can't apply for some of our funding. Or if you've gotten so much funding that you've passed the $100,000 cap from us, and then you can't apply anymore, or you have to ask for special permission from the board to apply. So this doesn't happen very often, which is why I don't really get asked it often. But yes, it is possible, but it would be pretty high. Is there a context that's in, or does that answer your question? Yeah, so we do try. I mean, I understand that a thing that does come up often is, you know, there's all these higher level artists who are getting factor funding, and why do they need it really, which is totally fair and valid in my eyes. But there is, like the programs we're covering here are, yes, available to general artists. I'll go through the ratings as well, and higher level artists. But once you get into like the level 3 of factor artist rating, you're also accessing different programs, so you're not competing in the same pool as much anymore. So we do our best to make sure that there is funding always set aside for entry level, or just, you know, not Metric and July Talk and whoever else, and they can access funding through a different avenue through factor. And then, yeah, once they reach that cap, then they're done, because ideally we want you to start out in artist development and get your funding and do really well, and then we want you to not need us anymore. And so once you reach that point, then definitely there is a limit. Okay, so evaluation process. I talked about the jurors a little bit. I'll just kind of go over it. So our juror pool right now is 1,800 people across the country. These are accredited music industry professionals. They work in all kinds of facets of the industry, so artists, musicians. For example, if you have a lot of experience being an artist and you've been doing this for a while, you can be a juror, and there's lots of benefits to that. Agents, producers, managers, radio people, promoters, labels, so pretty much anyone. There is an application process, of course, so it's not like we let anyone in, because we want to make sure that they are accredited, as they say. So you do show us sort of a music resume, as it were, and you have to have at least 5 years of experience in that particular industry, or in the area that you're saying that you have expertise in, and be active within the last 2 years. So maybe you did something 20 years ago. Well, we want it to be relevant and current now. So we try to make sure people are, you know, up to date with trends and whatever is going on in the industry now, that they're active, and then that's sort of it. So we like to grow that pool, and we need people from different provinces. So I will do a little plug of look into applying to become a juror. Some benefits are that you get to see applications. So of course, and it doesn't stop you from applying. So you can be a juror and you can apply to factor. It just wouldn't be in the same pool, of course. So we would obviously keep you separated out, and no, like, you wouldn't be looking at your own application clearly. So we avoid conflicts of interest, but you are allowed to do that. So this means that you kind of see what other people are writing, and you can see some other really good marketing plans and some bad marketing plans and whatever else is out there. So I think it's really beneficial for artists themselves to join the factor jury and see what they're sort of up against, and to help shape who does get the funding, right? So when people say, oh, it's too bad because Ontario gets all the funding, which, again, very valid point due to population. That's why we need more Alberta jurors and more BC jurors and from the territories to join in and influence that. And it is definitely an open process. That being said, it is volunteer. I'm sorry, we cannot pay you because there's just too many of them. And you can sort of choose, so there's 2 deadlines a year. You can pick when you have time to participate. So we would send you an invite and you're like, I'm super busy this round, I can't. You can just say no, and that's fine. And then you can
opt in when you do have time. So very flexible, but yes, volunteer, definitely look into it. I think it's a good thing. Okay, now that I did that spiel, so what jurors look at when they're looking at these juried applications, it sets songs, vocals and lyrics, musicality, marketing plan, and team. So team is something I haven't really talked about yet, but the first three obviously all fall into the actual song. So as you can see, it is still the #1 most important and heavily weighted thing in your application. Your marketing plan, also very important. And then team is something that is not going to make or break your application, but a big thing around this is that you show the jurors that you have a support team behind you and with you that also believe in you. So it's good that you believe in yourself, and that's great, but do you have a producer who's really excited to work with you? And do you have a publicist who's like, you know, spouting all of your achievements all over the place? Do you have a manager or somebody who might be your manager? And of course, this also means that we understand a lot of people self-manage and self-produce and do a lot of things on their own, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, you are still working with a lot of people, even if you're self-doing a lot of things. There's people in your life and in your career that are helping propel you forward, and we want to know about them, and we want to hear from them. So a thing that is not mandatory in applications, but I think makes a big difference and looks really good to jurors, is to get letters of support. So if you're about to work on an album and you tracked down this producer you really like, who worked on this other album you love and you think it would be a great fit, have them write you just a couple lines of support to say, hey, I'm going to work with this person and they're great, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a nice thing to have, and jurors do notice it and take note of it. So again, not mandatory. It's not going to affect your score negatively, but it does show people that there is a vote of confidence in you, and I think that makes a really big difference. Okay. Any questions around that? The jurors or the jury, or just gives me a chance for water. Okay. So there are some rules around applying to these 2 juried programs. It used to be that we had 3 deadlines a year, and it's now 2 deadlines a year. And you can only apply to one of the 2 programs once per year. So October is coming up. Say you apply to artist development. Whether you get it or not, you cannot apply the following May. You will have to wait until the next October. So pretty much the rule is once every 12 months. It does make it a bit difficult, but it also makes, we want people to put in significant thought and meaning into those applications, not like the night before, say, whatever, I'm just going to throw my hat in the ring, because the fact is they are extremely, extremely competitive. We get a lot of applications. It was kind of overclogging our system when we had the 3 deadlines per year, because people were sort of just throwing them in every deadline, which is unfair for our jurors, really. They are volunteers, and we want people to take this seriously and to treat it as competitively as realistically it is. So you cannot apply to 2 deadlines in a row. This means if you don't feel you're ready for this October, don't rush it and don't push it, because then you're going to say you don't get it. You're not going to be able to do it until next October. So I would say I don't want to discourage people from applying quickly. If you feel like, hey, I have a strong application, a strong sound, and you're ready, definitely do it, even if it's the night before. But it's just an important thing to keep in mind that your chances are a little bit more limited than they were in past years. That being said, if you do apply, for each program, the top 20 that do not receive funding but are just under that cusp will be allowed to reapply again. So say you got really, really close and you were in that top 20 that just happened to fall under the budget line, we will allow you to reapply again because, well, you were really close and chances are you'll probably get it next time. So there is a little bit of a leeway to let people get back in if they were very, very high in their score. There's also a 3-month window before each deadline where you can create and edit and submit and work on your application. So outside of that 3-month window, the portal is locked and you cannot do anything in it. That means that if you applied, you didn't get it, and the time passes, it's going to be wiped from the system. So make sure you keep everything saved on your own local copy and don't rely on the Factor portal to maintain your application forever, because it will have to get cleared out. So how many applications were they funding each round? The past round, so the first deadline of these new rules was this past May, and those results just went out in August, and they were very high because we had a little influx of funding, which is great, happy, wonderful news, and we were able to put a whole bunch of more money into the 2 jury programs. So the success rate for artist development, for example, was 40%, which is the highest I've ever seen it in being here at Factor or even knowing about Factor. Generally, it's around 17 or 18%, so pretty much double. And then for juried sound recording, I believe it was 21%, which again, very high. Generally, it's around 10%. So the success rates doubled this specific round because we had a lot of extra money. That's not something that is going to happen every round. It's hard to say. Hopefully next one will be the same, given that the government gave us the money, so hooray. But generally it is a bit lower, 10%, and then about 17, 18%. This translates to about 100 artist development applications, and maybe in like 40 to 50 juried sound recording applications. So it does change, but definitely look at, I don't have it with me here, but we did add it in our newsletter. So once the results do go out, we kind of let you know the percentages and how many got funding and how many didn't. But we do get around 1,000 to 1,200 applications every round, and then yeah, about 150 or so receive the funding. So it is competitive, as those numbers show you, but not to be discouraging. You can definitely keep trying until you do get it. Okay. Any more questions about how that works? I do have the numbers just to kind of continue on that for our last year, for 2018-2019, for example, which was a more standard year for artist development and juried sound recording without that additional influx of government money. So out of the whole year, 14% of artist development applications were successful, and for juried sound recording, hold on, it's a little bit separated. Yes, it was around the 10 or 11. So that's kind of where it's at. But hey, we do have extra money for next round, so if that encourages you to apply, I would say go for it, because your chances are a little bit higher. Okay, some tips for applying to jury programs. I kind of said most of these already, but for your plan and for your marketing plan, make sure that your goals are very specific and very achievable. So it's good to dream big, but if it's just not realistic, it's going to look like you are not aware of where you're at in your career, or aware of where you are geographically, or any that kind of stuff. So make sure it is achievable, and it doesn't have to be anything huge. It could be, I want to get to this many Spotify streams and I want to make 3 videos. Great, go for it, right? So no one's looking for grandiose plans. They just want realistic plans that make sense for you. And everybody's career and project is going to be very different, and those goals could be all over the place. So don't look at what other people are doing, look at what you need to be doing for your career and for your project, and that is the goal that you want to hit, not a goal that you think might look good to a juror or somebody else. And make sure it's specific, so it doesn't have you don't need to get into specific numbers necessarily, but it can't just be increase my following. Like, what does that mean? Where, on what, how, who are they? So think of the specifics of those goals and lay them out, and then ultimately say, how are you going to achieve them? And that in itself should be most of your plan. Proofread, I mean, yes, obviously you're not going to get docked marks, but obviously it looks more professional if you make sure everything is looking good. Consider your reader. So again, this is kind of more about thinking about who's on the jury. It's going to be your peers. It's going to be people who know your genre, ideally. And their looking at it from a factor lens. So not an arts council, it's factor. We still care about the art, but think about radio and think about playing shows and things like that. So just be aware of what factor looks for, which I've sort of talked about here and is also in our guidelines, and let that kind of guide the way that you're going to write. Choose your genre wisely. So I said this at the very beginning. This is because your juror is going to be an expertise in that genre. Say you are generally a folk artist and this album you're making is a little more pop centered. Maybe you should pick pop for that specific application so that it'll go to pop jurors. And if that makes more sense, because you want people who are in that area and in that field and know what's going on in that genre. Any recommendations for guidance on choosing genre? Folk rock band. Yeah, I don't really have guidance on that. It's going to depend on you and what you think that sound is. Whichever one is most dominant, go with that. And also think which side of that maybe would be have the widest appeal. So usually you get about 7 to 8 different unique jurors looking at your application. So when you're picking songs as well as picking your genre, think of the song that is going to appeal to the widest range of people, even if it's only within one genre. So if you're a folk rock band, but you're like a little more folky and you end up picking folk, then don't pick your super rocky song from that album, right? So try to line up your assessment track as well as your genre to think of like hitting as many check boxes for those jurors as possible. At the end of the day, it's not a perfect system. It's going to be a little bit subjective. One person's folk is another one's rock and another one's pop or whatever, especially within those genres that are more popular. But I would say go with what you want it to be and what you think it is, because then that's what's going to come through in how you write, in your bio, in your look, and everything. So if you choose rock, but you realistically look and sound a little more folky because you wanted to be in front of the rock crowd for some reason, I wouldn't recommend that. So that's really all I can say on that, because it is subjective. It'll just be how you feel about it, and I think that's the most important part. You want to believe in your own genre, so don't choose it to like make somebody else happy, because then I think it's not going to come through very well in your application. I feel like that was kind of not really an answer, but I hope it helped a little bit. Okay, so yes, genre, very important. Next is, well, we actually give you your juror comments automatically now. You don't have to request them. This is if you get rejected. If you get a rejection, when you get that email, all of the comments that the jurors leave, which we encourage them to leave constructive criticism on all applications, are included in that email. You can kind of see what maybe you could work on, what was good, what wasn't good. Even if you do get the funding, I would say ask for your comments, because then you want to see, okay, what did they like? What path can I continue on? And again, jurors are subjective, comments are subjective. Take them as you wish. I think most of the time they are important and helpful, but also with a grain of salt. Somebody might not fully understand your goal or your dream or whatever it might be, and it makes sense to you and it doesn't make sense to them. That's fine. That doesn't mean you're doing something wrong or that you need to change everything, right? So read it, and if you're just like, whoa, that makes no sense and I totally don't agree, that's okay, and you don't agree. That being said, it's also very, very important to note that a juror's comments, which by the way are always anonymous, so you're not going to know who left you what, does not always reflect the score. So we have some people sometimes come back and say, well, this comment was kind of didn't make sense to me and I don't understand why they would say this or whatever, and then we look it up and the juror who left that comment actually gave them the highest score. So it doesn't always correlate in that way. You're going to see your final score, but you're not going to see all of the individual scores that you got. And keep in mind, sometimes people are like, wow, that was really great, 90% or 9 out of 10 or whatever. But maybe they're just the type of person who likes to give that constructive criticism more than just a thumbs up, good job. So take it with a grain of salt, but I think they are very, very valuable, and they do help you, I think, to put together your next application, whatever it might be. And then you can kind of do with that as you wish. Feedback, I think, is better to have, even if you don't love it all the time, than to not receive any kind of feedback at all. So yes, but they will come automatically in your email. Any questions about any of what we just said? Okay. This is a little bit more of the same. So it says tips for success. I talked about this, understanding your funder. So I mentioned the factor looking at commercial viability a little bit more than an arts council might. So start preparing early, even if it's, especially if it's your first time applying. I could not emphasize that more. Do not leave it last minute. Our system also gets a little laggy towards the end, so if you're doing it the night before, that's not a great idea. Take the time to look at the guidelines and look at the questions and familiarize yourself with what our online system looks like, and I think that kind of helps set you up for success early on. Read the program guidelines, of course. Be aware of what you're getting into and what the rules are surrounding it, as well as what the rules are for after the fact. Say you apply and you do get the grant. Like what do we expect of you after? I think that's really important to know before you feel overwhelmed. It's not overwhelming. There are some rules, and unfortunately it's not something we can do much about, but I think being aware of that ahead of time makes it a little less daunting. Connect with your project coordinator. I haven't talked about project coordinators yet, but they are a wonderful resource. So in our office we have 6 different project coordinators, and they will be your contact. So once you sign up and make profiles in our system, you'll be assigned to one specific one, and that is your one and only person that you get to speak to. So you can call them and email them and chat with them and ask them questions, and you'll always get the same person, and you'll have somebody who starts to know you and they know your project, so you're not just kind of calling the office and talking to whoever and re-explaining yourself over and over again. So you're going to have a project coordinator who helps you through all of this process from beginning to end and through completion, and kind of just is there for you. So they're a very good resource. Bug them as much as you want. That's what they're there for. That's their job, is to help you steer through all of the factor stuff. If someone else is writing your grant, make sure you read it. Yeah, this is a big one. So if you choose to use a grant writer, which I have no personal feelings on, Factor does not endorse any, nor do we say it's a bad idea. It's very up to you. It depends on the situation, and everybody is different. But if you do decide to choose a grant writer, you should be aware of what they're putting in your grant, lest you get to the end and you're trying to do a completion thing and there's a discrepancy. Factor is not going to get involved. So make sure you know who's writing it, make sure you read it, and that you're aware of what's going in there, because at the end of the day, you're still the one responsible for it because it's your funding and your money. So somebody may have written it, but it's not them who's going to take any fall for anything. So make sure you're aware of the contract and the agreement that you're entering into. Talk to previous recipients and search our factor funded list. So this is always nice. We do have a section on our website called recipients, where you can search by region, program, timeline, whatever it might be, and all the grants that we give out are public. It won't have like a lot of detail in it, but you do know who got what and through what program. So I think if you talk within your community and you share tips amongst each other and you find successful factor funded artists, I think that's a really good resource to getting an idea as to what did they do right and what did they do wrong, and hopefully have you go from there. And then understand public funding policy. The main thing here is just knowing that you cannot profit from public funds. So say you have a project, costs a lot of money, you apply to factor funding, but you also apply to Canada Arts Council or an Alberta Arts Council or something. That's totally fine. You just can't exceed 100% of the costs, right? So you do have to disclose to us when you're applying if you have applied for or received a different grant or different public funding for the same project. Because at that point, if you're going to exceed 100% of the costs, then we would have to cut it down a little bit. So just be aware of the rules of each of the funding bodies that you are applying to. Just a short section on approved projects. So once you have been approved and you have received a factor grant, there's definitely a lot of rules on that end of things. Keep track of all your receipts. Be very, very aware of what costs are eligible and which are not, because you don't want to have spent the money and then come back at the end of the day and then we tell you that you shouldn't, like, we're not going to cover that. That would not be good. So make sure you're aware of what those costs are. Try to avoid using cash. We do have some cash rules where it's okay up to a certain amount, but I would say it's just simpler and easier for everybody to avoid it as much as possible. Know the logo and acknowledgement requirements. These aren't too strict or hefty. This is part of my job, is to make sure people are abiding by these, but if you make an album and you print CDs, the Factor logo does have to be on the back cover, small things like that. So again, be aware of those things before you print and before you put stuff out into the world. This is another thing that will get reiterated many times over, and your project coordinator is there to help catch that stuff before it happens, hopefully. And if any plans change, let your project coordinator know. So it's okay that if you apply to either of these programs and you had a certain plan in mind, I just realized it's 7:10. If you had a certain plan in mind and then halfway through something changed and this producer backed out and you want a different one, or you just want to make a difference, that's okay. So as long as you still end up with costs that are eligible and everything makes sense for your project still with a few changes, that's totally okay. Just kind of let us know and keep in touch. And this is another reason why having a good relationship with your project coordinator is always nice, because it's just an easy phone call and say, hey, this happened, is that okay? They can say yes or no, and then you can kind of move on with your project. Okay, man, I went really over. I'm so sorry. Resources. So I talked about this. Our website has lots of stuff, how-to guides, step-by-step instructions. There's the marketing plan guide. We kind of try to give you as many resources as we can to help you through creating your applications. Your guidelines for each program, also very important. Annual reports. This kind of gives you the breakdown of where the funding goes, and it's broken down by genre and by region and program and component and all of that. Our recipients database I talked about. Project coordinator, regional education coordinators. I will talk about this just really quick. Every province has a regional association. So Alberta Music is in Calgary, and they are there to help you with Factor funding. Oh, there's somebody there. So they're there to help guide you through an application, or say you received funding, sorry, you didn't receive funding and you want to talk about some feedback or something, you can always go to them and they can help you. So these are people that we're in touch with all the time and that we chat with all the time, and they do understand Factor programs, and they can help people maybe a little more hands-on and one-on-one than we can from here. So that's a very, very good resource that I highly recommend you take a look at. And they put on workshops and events and all kinds of things as well. Okay, that's it. So I finished. I'm sorry I went over. I hope you're all still like alive and not hating me right now. If you have any questions, you can throw them in now. If not, you can always email me afterwards if they come to you in the middle of the night or something. That's always fine with me. Yeah, thank you, Diana, for reaching out. I'm glad this worked out. I know we tried for a few months to get it going. Okay, fantastic. So yes, I think my email should be somewhere in wherever you signed up. Just the communications@factor.ca is fine. That'll come to me, and I can always guide you to the right place. The presentation was recorded, so I think it takes like a couple hours or something for it to become available. But once it is, I'll send Diana the link, and then she can always send it around to whoever needs it or is asking for it. And then you can rewatch and look at this presentation if there's anything you want to see again. Okay. Yay, you're welcome, everyone. I hope it was helpful. Again, don't be a stranger, and you can definitely reach out if you have anything that comes up. Okay, we'll stop that. Bye, everybody. You too. I don't know how to close this.